Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Toilets and Titles. My name is Justin Stevens. I'm back at you with another off-season breakdown episode. As you can see from the background, we have the Atlanta Falcons for today. We're very fortunate to have a recurring guest come back from last offseason. I'm going to introduce him real quick just for a second. But this time around, my man George Reed, who's been really bailing me out on these offseason breakdowns this season, he got today's guest. He's gotten a bunch of guests lined up. George, I know you had a rough day today at work, but hopefully we can help you relax in some air conditioning finally and have a little fun this evening. What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, it's not 112 degrees or 116 degrees rather inside my house. So I'm absolutely digging this. Air conditioning is one of God's greatest inventions, and I'm thankful for it every single day.
Right on. Aaron Freeman, out Falcons fans. Aaron Freeman is from the Locked On Falcons podcast, from the Locked On Podcast Network. If you guys don't listen to the Locked On podcast, you all know I'm a Colts fan. You all know that I follow the Colts religiously. I know the ins and outs of the Colts. I listen to these other Locked On shows because you're about to get some great insight from Mr. Freeman here on the Atlanta Falcons that you would not normally hear from random podcasts. This guy does his research, and I don't know if it's him or if he's got a bunch of minions behind him that are working for him and writing all his stuff. But Freeman, tell me a little bit about how that works, Aaron, in the background. Like, are you writing all of your own work? Is this all your content?
That is it. Yeah, it's all me. The good, the bad, and the ugly. Yeah, it's all me.
Well, I mean, I don't know that I've seen any bad, but I definitely, but I also, like, you can follow him on Twitter. Like I said, his handle's down there. You're also putting out articles from time to time. Am I right?
Yeah, it's been a minute since I put out one over at the Falcoholic.com, the SB Nation website for the Atlanta Falcons. Hopefully I'll get started back up pretty soon with the season starting now.
But other than that, is there anything else you got going on that you want to talk about or promote before we get started here?
Nope, just Locked On Falcons every single day. Whatever podcast platform you're subscribed to, you can find it. YouTube, all that stuff, Monday through Friday. So that's it. Yep,
every single day. He's not lying, and I get like 12 notifications every single day from all the different Locked Ons I listen to. Because honestly, I don't listen to all of them. I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't listen to all of them, but if I listen, I get those notifications and those updates. I can't listen every day, but I try. So. All right, so let's talk about the draft first. There are some things that stood out from the draft. Personally, I absolutely love the Drake London pick with the ridiculous suspension that we had from Ridley, which is a whole nother conversation. It's a huge need. What else, though, other than that obvious pick, really stands out to you about what the Falcons did in the draft this offseason?
The Falcons got a lot of love for their draft. They drafted a number of quality players, at least players that have the potential to be quality players. We'll sort of see how it all kind of plays out. But I think starting with the Drake London selection, they kind of got, their Calvin Ridley replacement, Julio Jones replacement. They sort of get that 1-2 punch with Kyle Pitts from a year ago, and sort of Drake London sort of slots in there as their primary weapon at the wide receiver position. So they're hoping that can, allow this offense to flourish in the future. They also got a potential quarterback of the future in Desmond Ridder in the third round, which most people considered to be a steal, given most people were sort of, as we got closer to draft, a lot of people were thinking, he might be the first quarterback off the board in round one at some point. And so the Falcons were able to land him, and we'll see if he can sort of turn into their long-term replacement for Matt Ryan, or is he just kind of a short-term sort of piece that they're just kind of kicking the tires on before they go out there and get their franchise quarterback in the future. They also got a nice running back in the backfield that they're hoping can provide some physicality as far as a grinder between the tackles to complement Cordero Patterson in the backfield. They were hoping Mike Davis could be that player for them last year. He wasn't really consistently that, and so they're hoping a fresher set of legs in Tyler Algier, the BYU running back in round 5, will be able to provide that. And then defensively, they were able to get some much needed help in their front seven, getting a pair of pass rushers, trading up for Arnold Ebiketie in round 2 out of Penn State, and D'Angelo Malone, a third-round pick out of Western Kentucky, who they have to pick with the pick that they wound up acquiring in the Matt Ryan trade. And so they're hoping that that can provide much needed juice for their pass rush, given that the Falcons were the worst pass rush in the NFL with only 18 sacks a year ago, which I think was like 11 less than the next worst team in the league in 2021. And then they also added a linebacker in Troy Anderson, a very athletic sort of player from Montana State in round 2 that played a variety of positions, was a quarterback, was a running back, and then finally moved to linebacker. So certainly has a lot of athleticism. That pass as a quarterback makes him an effective coverage player, but sort of the knock on Anderson is he's still kind of learning the intricacies of playing that linebacker position when it comes to defending the run. So they got a lot of nice pieces in their draft in those first 5 rounds, and then a couple of role players from Georgia in round 6 with John Fitzpatrick, the blocking tight end, and Justin Schaefer, the physical left guard. But certainly the potential there that if some of these players hit, as every Falcon fan and certainly everybody in Flowery Branch that runs the Falcons hopes that they do, could be a really solid draft class for years to come.
So you touched a little bit on Desmond Riddler. It's presumed right now Marcus Mariota is going to be starting the season as QB1 for the Falcons. What are the odds that we actually see Riddler on the field this year and getting quality snaps with the starting lineup?
I think it's pretty high. It's just a question of when rather than if Ridder sees the field. I think early in the season, the Falcons want to see Marcus Mariota and sort of see what he can do for this team and get this team back to being a competitive offense and whatnot, replacing Matt Ryan. Ridder is not necessarily expected to fill such large shoes that Matt Ryan filled and provided that stability for the franchise for the last 14 years. So Mariota is really kind of a bridge quarterback. And, if the Falcons get off to a slow start, as most people think they will, myself included, then probably at some point in mid-season, towards the end of the season, they will sort of see what they have in Desmond Ridder. And, whatever, the over-under, different people said it in terms of how many starts Mariota will make before Ridder, sees the field. I know some people said it at 8. I tend to say that's about where I kind of expect the Falcons to kind of turn the page on Mariota to Ridder, but obviously that depends on how competitive the team is, if the Falcons can surprise some folks and win some of those early games against a very tough schedule. But I think the plan is to get Ridder on the field at some point. And, we got a game on Monday night, so we'll find out a little bit more about Ridder and Mariota. But in the first showing against the Lions a week ago, Ridder did perform really well and certainly looked like the best rookie in this 2022 draft class, as some people thought he was going into the draft. And so if that can continue this summer, I think that only just kind of shortens the leash on Marcus Mariota to the point that, we may be having a conversation about Desmond Ridder starting games in October as opposed to waiting to November, December type of timeline.
Have you noticed anything out of camp at all that might suggest that that offensive line maybe have improved a little bit, or like anything from the offensive line that has returned from last season that we're excited about? Because I guess part of my concern is we saw a huge drop off last season in TJ Hawkinson in Detroit when Ragnow got hurt, and he had to really play a lot of run support. That really affected that entire offense, which, it's Detroit, so we don't expect a whole lot out of that offense anyway. But for the Falcons, you guys have the weapons with Pitts. I just absolutely hate to see something like that happen. Is that anything at all? Like, am I just being overly aggressive with my concerns here, or is this something that you might be seeing in camp right now?
No, I think you're spot on with that concern, right? From a fantasy standpoint, from a reality, I guess you would call a football standpoint, the biggest question mark on this football team right now is the offensive line. The Falcons had one of the worst offensive lines in football last year. They essentially ran it back with the same starting 5 that they had a year ago. Now it seems like there may be some changes with Jalen Mayfield, their rookie left guard, a year ago, presumably getting beat out in camp by career journeyman backup Elijah Wilkinson at that left guard position, but Wilkinson's been a career backup as sort of more of a swing tackle. And so whether or not he can give the team significant improved play at that left guard position is a major question mark. Mayfield was arguably the worst guard in the league last year, so it's not as if like he has to be incredible to be an upgrade there, but it's still potentially going to be a problem area. They're having competition at center in Drew Dolman and Matt Hennessy. Hennessy's the incumbent, and Dolman's a second-year player that this new regime was high on. Didn't quite win out that job last summer, but seems to be pushing in that direction there. The other positive sign, if you want to call it that, is Caleb McGarry, the much maligned 2019 draft first-round pick, alongside right guard Chris Lindstrom. McGarry's been very up and down, probably more down than up in his 3 years in Atlanta. Now, the buzz has been that he's in the best shape of his life, but you guys know you hear the same buzz about every team and every player every single offseason. So, someone as cynical as me is not going to necessarily buy it until you see it on the field. And, maybe on Monday night, we'll see that against the Jets, but you're kind of going into the season having question marks about, how good can you, tell this guy has improved, how much improvement he's made just from the preseason game. So that's a major question mark. And you're right. If you're the one player that you want to buy on this Falcons team is Kyle Pitts, and the quarterback can't get him the ball if he's on his backside, right? And if the Falcons are needing to use tight ends to chip and whatnot, that's going to lower Kyle Pitts' value. Now, fortunately for Kyle Pitts, I don't think he's going to suffer quite to the same degree that TJ Hawkinson, because Kyle Pitts spends a considerable amount of his time playing in the slot and split out wide. So he's essentially, at least how the Falcons utilized him last year, more of a kind of wide receiver than a true tight end. So it probably won't hurt him as much as it could hurt other tight ends, given the Falcons' potential offensive line concerns. But certainly you do worry about, if the Falcons wind up giving 40, 50, 60 sacks this year, which is certainly on the table if this offensive line doesn't improve, that's going to tank pretty much everybody on this offense's fantasy value.
Yeah, absolutely. And I didn't mean that necessarily as a fantasy question. I probably made it sound like that because that's where my brain always goes. So I apologize for that if you're not normally a fantasy guy. But George does have just a follow-up question here. But before we get to that question, I'm going to give him time to get that ready. This question is brought to you by the patreon.com/toilets titles. Please help support the show so we can continue to try to do our best effort to get out as much content as possible. Guys, we're putting out about 8 to 12 shows a week to help you guys out. So all that hard work from all the guys you've been seeing, all the different faces on the screen the last 6 months to a year, it's made possible by you guys continually watching. So we greatly appreciate your support. George, you got another question for him?
Yeah, I do. So last year, Cordell Patterson kind of took the ball. He took the fantasy world by storm, but he kind of took the NFL by storm too, because he was used in a role that he had never been predominantly used at before, as primary as a running back. And this offseason, they drafted Tyler Algier, and then they brought in a guy that I'm a huge fan of. Like, I'm a huge Damian Williams guy. I love this guy. I think he doesn't get the credit that he's a good running back in NFL circles. How do you see that backfield playing out? Is it Cordell Patterson still going to be the RB1 for this team? Or do you see Algier or even possibly Damian Williams carving out a positive role for this team?
Yeah, that's another question that we haven't quite gotten a definitive answer yet. I think the Falcons want Algier to kind of be their workhorse and be that sort of grinder between the tackles that Arthur Smith had in Tennessee and Derrick Henry. Obviously, no one's going to be quite to the same degree that Derrick Henry did it. But, basically a poor man's Derrick Henry is kind of the ideal vision I think the Falcons have for Tyler Algier. You're right. Damian Williams has been a very reliable veteran. I was a big fan of him going back to his days in Miami. He always seems to never get enough love, and it kind of follows him here to Atlanta, where he's in a competition with Quadri Olison to be that sort of third running back in the rotation. But given that Williams is probably a more proven third down option and pass protector, that does give him some potential value, because I think the Falcons want to minimize Cordero Patterson's workload as a running back this year, as a pure runner. and maximize his workload as a pass catcher, which is where he really shined last year for the Falcons. And with this Arthur Smith offense, one of the things that Arthur Smith did very well in Tennessee was get the ball into the hands of his playmakers, whether that's Derrick Henry and whether that's AJ Brown, and let those guys sort of cook in a lot of ways. And that's, I think, a big reason why Cordero Patterson really blossomed last year, because he was the player most capable of just basically, taking a 5-yard check down, turning into a 25-yard gain. We know that he's a dynamic and a very effective player with the ball in his hands due to his, being one of the greatest kickoff returners of all time. And I think the Falcons want to see more and more of that. But in order to sort of save him, given that he's going to be 30, 31 this year, and he did deal with some injuries late in the season last year, they don't want to have him subject himself to wear and tear. So that does give an opportunity for one of these other running backs to get a lion's share of the workload. And again, I think they want it to be Algier, but given, you can't always put too much faith in rookies to hit the ground running in this league. It is a possibility that Damian Williams winds up getting the lion's share of that workload if Algier doesn't prove himself to be ready. But I think that's going to be a question mark. And when it comes to how the Falcons will sort of distribute carries, I say to anybody who asks me that question, it's not the first time when it comes to like a fantasy standpoint, your guess is as good as mine how that kind of plays out.
Very good.
I think he got robbed. He should have been the Super Bowl MVP for Super Bowl 54. I'm never going to live that down. They robbed that man of his Super Bowl MVP.
Yeah, and those MVPs lead to big money too.
Yeah.
Yep. We've seen players get big contracts off of one big game. Hey, the next question comes from Russell Mavis, listener of the show, watching right now. He wants to know about Michael Walker, but after you touch on Walker, maybe we kind of mentioned about the defense a little bit earlier with the draft. We didn't really talk too much about maybe any vets that are coming back that may have taken a step up, or anybody else that you expect to help make this defense a little better this season.
Yeah, first on Michael Walker, he's a third-year player, fourth-round pick from the Falcons in 2020, has been more of a role player, special teams player his first 2 years in the NFL. But this year, given the departure of Foye Oluokun in free agency, given the expectations at this point in time that Deion Jones's time here in Atlanta, it will come to an end at some point in the next few weeks or months. I think the Falcons are hoping to trade him and basically get out of that contract at some point in the near future. Michael Walker has been sort of tasked with sort of filling some of that void alongside Rashaan Evans, the two projected starters going into week one. And Walker has been a guy that has impressed this regime, and he's kind of an unproven commodity there, but all signs, all indicators so far in training camp is that he has, made considerable gains, considerable leap. And so we're just going to wait and see, does that lead to him being a pretty consistent and effective starter for this team, or is he just kind of a stopgap option, given that the Falcons may not have necessarily better options? They did draft Troy Anderson, as I mentioned earlier, and he's sort of seen as the long-term, option for the team at that off-ball linebacker position. And is it going to be beside Michael Walker, or is it going to be beside somebody else in the future? So that remains to be seen. But Walker is certainly a young, talented player that has, a bright future ahead of him, and we'll sort of see if he can deliver on that this upcoming season. As for the rest of the defense, their two mainstays on defense are AJ Terrell, their third-year cornerback, who was, depending on what metrics you looked at, potentially the best cornerback in the league a year ago, and obviously Grady Jarrett, a longtime veteran on the defensive front, who had a little bit of a down year in 2021. A lot of that is owed to the changing scheme and being more of that sort of penetrating, disruptive D tackle in last year's scheme under defensive coordinator Dean Pease, asking him to be a little bit more of that hold the point of attack type of player. And then you couple that with basically the fact that the Falcons talent up front was pretty much non-existent outside of him. So teams were basically doubling and tripling him a bunch of times last year, and nobody could make the Falcons pay for that. Obviously, they're hoping additions like Arnold Ebiketie, D'Angelo Malone, Lorenzo Carter, among others, will sort of help alleviate some of that pressure off of Grady Jarrett up front. And they also added Casey Hayward to the secondary to play across from AJ Terrell, because AJ Terrell was so good last year that their starter last year, Fabian Moreau, was basically getting picked on by defenses all year long, because why throw it to AJ Terrell's side of the field when it was basically a no-fly zone? And so they're hoping that the veteran in Casey Hayward, when teams choose to do that, will make teams pay. And I think that's going to be a critical addition for the Falcons defense and their pass defense to make considerable gains. Other veterans that they added this offseason were Sean Evans, a player that's familiar with Dean Pease's scheme from Tennessee, more of a physical downhill run defender, something they didn't really have in either Oluokun or Deion Jones last year at that linebacker position. But Evans has some limitations in coverage, so there's a little bit of a give and take with that comes. But this defense is still a long way away from being a great unit, but they have some young talented pieces like Terrell, some of these linebackers, some of these defensive players. They have 2 new starters at the safety position in former draft picks and Jalen Hawkins and Richie Grant that flashed in limited opportunities last year. And they're hoping that with these guys being full-time starters that they can blossom into quality starters. So it's a young defense with a couple of veterans like Grady Jarrett and Casey Hayward and Rashaan Evans to sort of provide some stability. But, this is a rebuilding football team, and the future seems bright for the Falcons defense if some of these young pieces can work out for them.
What would you say is the biggest weakness on the defense? Is it the front 4?
Yeah, they had a terrible pass rush last year. They've made gains there, but the expectation is it's not like it's going to go from 18 sacks to 50 sacks overnight. And so the ability for them to create reliable pressure with 4-man pressure concepts and that sort of thing is the biggest concern you have right now for the defense. You feel decent about the back 7, the coverage ability, given the presences of guys like AJ Terrell and Casey Hayward. Again, maybe not the greatest back 7 in ever assembled in league history, but a bunch of players that are proven incompetent and a couple of young guys that are intriguing. But you do wonder about that front. Can they stop the run? Can they get after the quarterback? They were one of the worst run defenses in the league last year. They were even the worst pass rush in the league last year. They added some young pieces, but not the sort of proven veteran options that you would expect and want to get sort of those immediate improvements on their front. So that is, I think, the biggest question mark for them.
So my next question, actually, we're going to shift gears a little bit. We're going to go into that wide receiving room. We touched bases just a little bit on Drake London, who I already said I think is going to be an absolute monster this season when it comes to targets at the very least. Obviously, he's a rookie. We don't know exactly what he's going to do with those targets, but he has every opportunity to shine, and I really think he will. After that, though, like Olamide Zaccheaus is a guy that, like, he shows burst of talent, and I almost mean that literally. The burst is there. But you guys have 2 guys in particular that I used to be kind of huge on back in the day, Geronimo Allison and Auden Tate. They're kind of depth pieces right now for the Falcons, and I haven't heard anything about them on the roster. And I know you got Bryan Edwards there, but I've got so many questions in my head about what that wide receiving core is going to look like and how it's going to play out on the field. What's your take on kind of this entire wide receiving room?
Yeah, I think you're right. Drake London has a golden opportunity ahead of him to sort of be their target monster. He's dealing with a knee issue that is not expected to limit him heading into the regular season, but we probably won't see him for the rest of the preseason. So it's something to keep an eye on as things go here in the next couple of weeks. But the expectation is at some point in September, he'll be fully healthy and ready to go and start eating up those targets. Bryan Edwards is kind of expected to be that sort of number 2 guy. And, part of me wonders, given this injury to Drake London, given Bryan Edwards' sort of familiarity with Marcus Mariota and having that sort of rapport with him, does that lead to him sort of hitting the ground running a little bit earlier in the season? And that leads to him being more of the go-to option in the passing game early in the season? Makes me wonder a little bit about that. But I think those are going to be your 2 primary options. Olamide Zaccheaus is also their 3rd option. The concern you have with guys like Auden Tate and Geronimo Allison is at this point in time, I don't even know if they're going to make the team. They're not going to make the roster. I think they're probably more competing for practice squad spots. And a big part of that is because of Arthur Smith's offense is heavily, geared towards the tight end position. And I think, were second and lowest in the league in terms of utilizing 11 personnel, those 3 wide receiver sets. So in reality, it's basically there's only 3 wide receivers in this offense that ever really see any action on the field. And that's expected to be London, Zacchaeus, and Edwards. And then after that, you probably have guys that are more going to be special teams depth options like Demir Bird and Kadero Hodge that seem to be working ahead of guys like Tate and Allison at this point in time. So, I do feel like, Tate is, I think, a talented player, and basically until the Falcons traded for Bryan Edwards, it seemed like he was poised to have a potential breakout year here in Atlanta, but it feels like it's a little redundant there. And Allison kind of was a late offseason pickup to add more competition there, and it seems like he's more destined to the practice squad in the future. So I don't know if this year, 2022, is the year, Justin, where you'll be able to say, hey, I told you guys about Tate and Allison having these breakout potential. I don't know if it's going to be here in Atlanta. It might have to come somewhere else.
Yeah, I definitely didn't expect that. I've already given up on them. I'm just saying, like, early on in their careers, they seem to be they had the potential, and I kind of expected bigger of them. So I'm really pulling for them as a fan to at least make the roster, and I've been upset a little bit with Olamite's overall performance when he's had the opportunities. But also, it's, not everybody is built to be the one. So when he has that chance to be the one, you don't always expect it. So I'm really hoping that he can excel as well as a wide receiver 3 in the NFL.
I got a question about the Falcons wide receiver core. Somebody we haven't even talked about because he's not playing this year, Calvin Ridley. Mm-hmm. There was talks in the offseason that the Falcons were looking to trade him. And teams were inquiring, but they did the right thing, in my opinion, and told teams, no, we're not going to trade him, because they had a feeling the suspension, at least that's what it appears from the outside looking in. They knew that there was a suspension coming down for Ridley. I don't know if they were aware it was going to be the whole year or not. Are they still looking to move him possibly next offseason, or are they going to bring him back and play him with the Falcons and have a wide receiver room that has both Drake London, Calvin Ridley, and then Kyle Pitts at tight end? Like, that's going to give defensive nightmares. And I didn't know if that's something that the Falcons were potentially looking at maybe for next year, just keeping him, or if they would still be looking to move him for an asset in the coming offseason.
Yeah, my expectation is that they will move on from Calvin Ridley at their earliest convenience. So once he's reinstated by the league, if they can trade him, if he still has trade value at that point in time, they'll try to move him at that point in time. If he doesn't, then I kind of expect them to sort of cut him at their earliest convenience. I think Calvin Ridley's time in Atlanta is pretty much over. Again, I could be wrong on that. Certainly factors could play out this season where they will feel a lot more it'll be more compelling to bring Calvin Ridley back and add him to that wide receiver mix. As you say, yeah. I think on paper, you look at it and you say, you got this big guy in Drake London, you had this, quick, separator in Calvin Ridley. It's the perfect sort of complementary set of sort of a 1-2 punch in the league. But I think the Falcons, are potentially looking to move on at that point in time, in part due to, accountability and him letting down the team and doing all those various things that coaches will wind up talking about. But certainly a very talented player in Calvin Ridley, but I do think his future is elsewhere in the future.
So there's only one guy. We have like 17 guys on our team. And there's only one of us that actually ever really cares about kickers. And fortunately tonight we have one of those guys. I absolutely love kickers when it comes to football because they're such a necessary evil. Obviously, your upper management seems to like your kicker as well. 5 years, $24.5 million, $11 million guaranteed. In my mind, one of the top 3 kickers in the league. Do you see any real relevance with that contract? Because I guess what I'm getting at here, in my mind, you have a team that is not like a Super Bowl caliber team right now, right? So you're tying up 5 years worth of contract in this guy, and we all know it's the NFL. Contracts can come and go, but in my mind, that tells me that the Falcons have a plan for later on, and they want that necessary evil to be a consistent. Do you see this team like I know that's digging deep into like narratives here, but that's what I do. I'm a narrative guy. Do you see this team really believing that they can turn things around in the next few years and have that consistency to the point where they're actually that worried about their kicker position?
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it. I do feel like the Falcons, they are rebuilding, and they're hoping that they've already started to lay the foundation for success on offense to take advantage of a kicker like Younghoe Koo. But I think part of it is also the fact that the Falcons aren't very good at this point in time, and their ability to win games may come down to their ability to kick a game-winning field goal. It was the case last year where 3 of their wins came off of the leg of Younghoe Koo. And so having that reliable field goal kicker certainly is something that teams that aspire to win Super Bowls definitely need. And I think it's something that teams at the bottom of the league certainly also could make the case that they need as well to help them, try to maximize their chances. I guess the teams that are probably in the middle class of the NFL probably are the teams that probably should not value kickers to the same degree that the lower teams and the higher end teams. So I think it makes sense for the Falcons to value Younghoe Koo and lock him up. He's a young kicker. He's been very good for them these last couple of years, replacing Matt Bryant, who was a long-time kicker for the Falcons, very clutch in his ability to help that team win games when they were back in their days where they were aspiring to be a Super Bowl team. So I think Koo will give them value in the near future, helping essentially a bad football team try to win a few more games each and every year, and then in long term, if and when this team can turn things around and be that sort of perennial playoff team, they're probably a couple of years away from that, but certainly I think can add value to that team as well.
And the way they structured his contract is I love it. So it's a de-escalating scale. So each year the guaranteed money is less and less and less. So if they want to cut him and need to do, save some money on the salary cap in 2 or 3 years from now, it's almost next to nothing to cut him and save yourself $3 or $4 million, which is today's NFL. So yeah, it was a good signing.
Yeah. And you mentioned Matt Bryant too. Like, I was a big fan of him as well. So like, how can you not mention long-term guys like that and not feel warm and fuzzy about kickers? All of you should be checking yourselves. They are the heart of they call it football, not handball. All right. All right. Anyhow, I want to get on to your prediction for this up and coming season. That's one of the most common questions that everybody wants to know, like win-loss record wise. And I've got the schedule back here. I know you probably already know it and have your favorite games lined up and circled and ready to roll. But the schedule here is mostly for anybody watching. But do you have a rough idea win-loss record-wise on what this Falcons could be facing this season?
Yeah, I've kind of maintained since the schedule came out that this is going to be a scrappy 4 or 5 win team. I do not expect the Falcons to win a ton of games against a bunch of teams, particularly early in the season, that sort of have Super Bowl aspirations. Teams like the Rams, teams like the Bucs, teams like the Bengals, et cetera. You could throw the 49ers potentially into that mix as well. So I think it's going to be a rough start for the season for them. That middle part of the schedule where they get 2 games against Carolina, Chicago, Washington, Pittsburgh is kind of the soft part of the schedule. That's kind of where I kind of expect we'll probably first see Desmond Ridder to sort of ease his transition into the league against the softer part of the Falcons schedule this upcoming season. And that's, to me, where the Falcons could potentially pad some more wins in addition to what I'm sort of expecting. But right now, I don't have high hopes for this team winning a bunch of games, but I'm hoping they can be competitive against some of these better opponents. Last year, they won 7 games, but almost all of those wins outside of the division came against some, really bad teams that were picking, in the top 6, 7 picks in the draft. And so they had a really soft schedule. I think it was the 4th softest schedule according to win-loss record a year ago. This year, their schedule is going to be considerably harder, as I mentioned. And so, last year when they played some of these better teams, some of these playoff teams like Dallas, like New England, they got absolutely obliterated in those games. They lost by 40 points to Dallas. They got shut out by the Patriots 25-0 in that game midseason. And they just were not really that competitive against quality opponents for most of last year. And so my expectation, even if it won't result in improved win-loss record, is that in those games against teams like New Orleans, like Arizona, Baltimore, San Francisco, et cetera, that they will be a little bit more competitive than they were a year ago, where we're not seeing these 40-point blowouts or them getting shut down and shut out by, 4 or more scores like it was a year ago. And if that happens, then I think that's a positive step in the right direction, even if it doesn't result in this team winning more than 7 games.
Question for you. What is your favorite play in Falcons history?
Man, that's tough.
We did not give you a heads up on this one for a reason.
Well, I'm sure it involves Matt Ryan throwing the ball to Julio Jones at some point. So I'm just trying to going through my head of all the Matt Ryan and Julio Jones plays that I enjoyed. And there's just so many that it's hard to narrow it down to one. The play that just keeps popping up in my head is the big play he had. I want to say it was like 75 yards against the Packers in the NFC Championship game back in 2016, where he smoked, who was the cornerback that the Packers had no business putting on Julio in that game? Some guy off the practice squad. I can't remember who he was. And he just got absolutely obliterated in that game. And so that probably is one of several Julio Jones plays that immediately pop into mind.
Imagine coming off the practice squad and be like, yeah, your job today is to cover prime Julio Jones, and I wish you the best of luck with this. That's just not fair. Not fair at all.
I don't think that player's been in the league since that game, so he got screwed over. So, he had his one chance, and it didn't work out for him.
I guess it's still a little bit relevant to the Falcons because he is still within the division. But, obviously – by the way you're talking, and you're a Falcons fan, Julio Jones is one of my favorite all-time players in the NFL, much less the Falcons. What do you expect to see out of Julio this season playing against a division foe?
It's interesting because, a healthy Julio Jones, I still feel like can be a good player. We saw that in 2020 with the Falcons, but unfortunately for him, he hasn't been healthy since then. Basically missed most of last year in Tennessee with a hamstring injury that nagged him throughout the 2020 season. And you just kind of wonder if it will continue to spring up given his advanced age and the fact that those hamstring injuries tend to be a lot more bothersome for older players as they struggle to recover from things. So I'm not, expecting Julio to do a lot in Tampa Bay, but I think he can do just enough to help that team, do all the things that they want to do, which, as a Falcon fan is all the things I don't want to see them do. That's the benefit of being Tampa Bay, where you don't need Julio to show up every single week because you have Mike Evans. At some point you'll have Chris Godwin. You already have Russell Gage, another former Falcon, there to sort of give you that juice every single Sunday. And then if you can just kind of sprinkle in, a little seasoning of Julio Jones on top of things, particularly towards the end of the season where they'll need that boost to make a deep run in the postseason. That's kind of what you're hoping for. And so I think Julio is more than capable of providing that. And if he provides more, I won't also be shocked there because, I've watched Julio Jones, eviscerate teams for years and years. I'm not looking forward to being on the wrong end of that, this year in 2 games against the Bucs, as it was the opposite case for over a decade. So we'll see what he can do, but I still think, I'm always going to believe that there's still a lot left in the tank with Julio Jones.
Yeah, absolutely love the guy. Like, I hope for your case that your Falcons can still find a way to win those games. Also, I hate Tom Brady, but I would love to see Julio be able to go into that stadium and have a great game for the fans in Atlanta and still lose.
I appreciate that.
All right, George, do you have any other questions that we want to exit out with, or are we ready?
Justin, I can always go to Pineapple on Pizza if you need me to. If we need more content, Justin, I can do this.
Yeah, I've heard your break from the grind. I've heard you come up with some random questions out of the top of your head that, like most people would never even think of. So, what the hell? On the way out, Aaron, are you okay with pineapple on pizza?
I'm generally okay with anything on pizza. I've yet to have a truly bad slice of pizza. Pineapple is not my go-to, but I've had it from time to time and it's been fine. I don't have a strong take on it. You can put anything on a pizza and it's probably going to wind up being good.
There you go.
I knew I liked Aaron. I knew I liked him.
Yeah, I agree. Anything on a pizza goes. All right, Aaron. Again, real quick, tell them where to check you out, and then we'll hit the exit here so we can move on.
Well, if you like snark and sarcasm, then you can follow me on Twitter at FalcFans. Very snarky and sarcastic about the Atlanta Falcons. If you want a more serious, grounded takes on the team, then check out Locked On Falcons Monday through Friday on a variety of podcast platforms, including on YouTube. So go check that out as well.
And you guys can find this episode and all of our other episodes on toiletstitles.com, where we have all of our videos, articles, and all of our other amazing content from our amazing content guys. I do mean all the rest of them. But I've got patreon.com/toiletstitles to continue to help support us. Guys, this was a fun episode. I really appreciate your insight, Aaron. It's always a pleasure to have you, and hopefully we have some good luck with your Falcons this year.
Hopefully, but good things don't usually happen to the Falcons, so I'm fine with it.
Enjoy the game tonight.
I will try.
All right. Have a good night, guys.